Good deal. All right. Well, okay, and two. Perfection. This one. I should turn this off. My bad. Well, hello, folks. Thanks for joining. Gonna get started here in just a second. Okay, good. Let me do not disturb one. There we go. We'll get rid of that. Okay, and just making sure we're linked up everywhere. Okay, so for anybody who hasn't seen me do this before, this is my first time doing it on TikTok. Yes. So any TikTok folks who are new to this, I'm just doing frequently answered questions. So in my work as an editor, these are things that I've been asked like repeatedly, and so I'm just going to offer my answers. The hope being that it helps someone who might have a similar question, and then you kind of have at least my perspective. I won't say I have all the answers, but I've certainly made enough mistakes to make some decent, give you some decent options at the very least, or what I feel like is a pretty solid perspective after doing this for a couple of decades at this point. All right. So last but not least is good old Book of Faces. So I'll get that started, and then we will be good to go. Oh, and I guess I should say, if you yourself have a question, feel free to put it in the chat. Now, I know TikTok moves a little a little fast, so I'm hoping that I will see it and be able to answer it. And if I don't, again, I'm learning. Please forgive me. I hope you can you can be patient with me while I work all the kinks out of doing this. All right. Oh gosh, I wish I could spell. It'd be great. Not that I'm a writer or anything. All right. And just the webcam. Microphone. Yup. The camera. Yep. Okay. We're not sharing any screens. All right. Should be good. Hopefully. Got it. Nope. Almost. Hold on. All right. Okay. Facebook folks are on board. Okay. So sorry about that. But of course, that's always the fun part, right? Is seeing how Tanisha stumbles while she's getting things set up. But again, my name is Tanisha Curtis, and I am the owner of WriterWorks University. And I am just doing the first of the year. Yeah, this is our first frequently answered questions of the year. So again, if you're new to this, it's just me answering. I usually pick just 3 questions that I've gotten before from clients or colleagues about the writing or publishing process. And it's just like, okay, here are my answers to those questions. And if you all have questions of your own, don't be afraid to put it in the chat wherever you're, looking at this, and I will try to answer it. So here we go. The first question I wrote down was about commissioning illustrations. I realized I hadn't covered this. So what people will ask me, or what will kind of come up in conversations about doing things like children's books, is shouldn't I, or is it okay, I guess is the thing, to commission illustrations while I'm also getting services for my piece. So like let's say the text, the story itself is in developmental edits or something like that. Then what people will think is, oh, okay, well, I can go ahead and just get the illustrator to go ahead and get started on illustrations while we're working on the story. And again, you're an adult, you can do whatever you want, of course, right? Why I wouldn't recommend that is because depending on what kind of shape your story is in, if it's not like set, then when you go to commission illustrations, if you're doing those at the same time, there could be changes that you make to the story that need to be reflected in the illustrations. And best case scenario would be you're hopping back and forth and making these various changes, and it can just be kind of extra stressful and cumbersome. Not that it's not already stressful, right? When it doesn't have to be, right? If you just wait and just get your story set, like I know this story in and out, it's clear, we've got it developmentally edited, copy edited, the whole shebang, like it's ready to go. And then you go get the illustrations, that tends to work out better and more smoothly than trying to do both at the same time. Or some people even do it backwards, which is like the worst case scenario, I would say. I understand that you might not think about how your story can impact your illustrations, but it really can be messy. So even if it's something relatively simple, like let's say in the story, you had somebody, grandma was wearing a red shirt or something like that. And, you changed the word on this line to the color red because that rhymed better with the previous line or whatever. Fine. Seems like a simple thing, right? But if somebody has created an entire series of illustrations where grandma is wearing a purple shirt, right, then they need to go through and change all of that. Now, again, depending on who you're working with, like maybe they don't mind, and depending on how they put together their illustrations, it might not even be that difficult to go through and change Granny's shirt to red in every single illustration. But very often, these are time-consuming things to try to do. And so if you need to make a change like that, now you're paying the person an extra fee because of that, instead of if you had just had the story set and somebody had, like one of the professionals you were working with had recommended, switching that to the color red earlier on. And then by the time you got to the point where you were commissioning illustrations, the story would have been set. That change never would even have been a thing that you thought about. And so you could commission the illustrations, without issue, right? And then it would have worked out pretty smoothly. But when you're trying to do both at the same time, it's just, I tell people it's kind of like hitting the gas and the brakes at the same time. Like there will be movement, but it's going to be a lot kind of jankier than it would be if you just did one step at a time in sequence. So that is generally going to be my recommendation. When it comes to illustrations, get your story written, get your story edited, get your text set. Like, all right, we're not touching this anymore. Then, worry about commissioning illustrations from an artist. That would be my recommendation. So, second question. Copyright preventing theft. Like I was talking about this, was it earlier today or yesterday? The Editorial Freelancers Association has, a Discord channel or server. And so we were talking about it on there. Well, something similar. It was a little tangential, but I was like, so this question is like on point. So the question would be, wouldn't getting my copyright registration submitted prevent somebody from stealing my work? And the answer is no. I'm not sure where this idea comes from. Like, all your copyright registration is doing is basically like making it official. Like, hey, this belongs to me. I created this thing, right? So fair enough. But again, that doesn't keep anybody from stealing it, right? Because the idea is you're going to publish it. And don't forget, like, to publish something means to make it available to the public, to publicize it. So if you make something available to the public and they purchase a copy of it, whatever they do with it after that point is whatever, right? They're going to do whatever they want to do. But if you are trying to set up a situation where it's physically impossible for them to steal your work, like that's not what that is. All that, because basically how it would have to work in general, right? I'm simplifying this, but in general is first you would have to have somebody know that your piece exists and decide that they can make some money off of it by plagiarizing, right? Or pirating your stuff. So that has to happen first. Then, which is not at all impossible, right? It does happen. I think most people understand that in the industry. Then, after it happens, you have to somehow find out that it happened, right? Because in theory, you're probably not like subscribing to a book pirating site to the point where you would see your book pop up in like an email or something like that and be like, oh, wait a minute, I'm not getting paid for this. I didn't give them permission to sell my book. And this is really a big key point. It's like so many places can pirate folks' work and you just would never know because there's just so many of them, right? Unless you're really going to put a lot of time and effort into seeking out these pirating sites and like I'm saying, like trying to actually run down who owns the site and who to hold accountable for what is on the site and being sold without your permission, yada, yada, yada. And you're just going to go down that whole rabbit hole. You wouldn't necessarily know, right? It's just happening and you don't necessarily have any idea that it's taking place. But let's say on the off chance you do figure it out, it's like, all right, cool. So it's happened, you found out that it's happening. And then after you found out that it's happening, it's time to try to, like I said, hold somebody accountable for it if you want to do so. And that would take figuring out who owns the site. At the very least, you would say, contact the help desk or something like that if they have anything like that, mind you, and be like, hey, could you take that down? Because I didn't give you permission to actually, do that, to sell my book. And you could do that. And I've heard some success stories with people doing that, just reaching out directly and saying, hey, could you please take my book down? And it getting taken down. Wonderful. Like, that's great. The issue really is just that for every one, that you get taken down that you found out about, who knows how many there are that are still in operation. And then if new ones pop up, next year or something like that, then they could do the same thing with your work. And it's just like, you know what I mean? It's just like, okay, well, I don't know, it's kind of like playing whack-a-mole. So, and again, this is with a copyright and all of that, with everything on your contact or your copyright page saying, don't copy this, don't distribute, blah, blah, blah. So what I also find a little odd about the idea that a copyright prevents someone from taking your work is that if someone were seriously contemplating stealing your piece, they are probably not a rule follower, right? Like, I get that that's what you think is happening. You're like, hey, I told you you can't do this. But again, that's why we have police officers, right? That's why we have watchdog desks and things like this, because people don't always follow the rules. So just because you told somebody that you don't want them to do something, that doesn't mean that they're not going to do it, right? So getting your copyright registered is really more of a treatment than a preventative measure, right? It's not a preventative measure at all. It doesn't prevent anybody from doing anything, because even with a copy, you got your copyright, I could buy a legal copy of your book. I could download it from Amazon or Barnes & Noble, wherever you're selling it. And then I could go, make changes to it, put my name on it, put my cover on it, whatever, and then turn around and sell it, or just take it directly and sell it on my site if I have a little bookstore style pirating site. That you can't stop me from doing that, right? Literally, because I bought it legally, right? So I just try to make that clear to people that it can still happen. It probably will still happen. Just because you submitted your copyright registration does not mean that somebody can't steal your work. If they have access to it, they can steal it. So if you want to spend your time, like I call it pirate hunting, have fun, go for it. But to really try to quash all of that and have it, your stuff isn't being pirated anywhere, I don't know that, because that would be like a full-time job, if not more than 40 hours a week, trying to hunt these people down and, contact folks and things like that to get your stuff taken down. And then again, you got to remember, if I have 1,000 books on my pirating site and one of them was yours and you got yours taken down, awesome. But then what about the other 999 authors who don't know that their stuff is on that site? So it's just, and I've seen people in forums and stuff, they will try to say, hey, I just found my book on this site, go check and see if yours is on there. But again, it is not happening at a high enough frequency for it to make like a real dent. I don't know, and like I said, y'all please share with me if you do know. I don't know of any way to actually prevent someone from stealing your work other than to not publish it. If you just never publish it, then of course they don't have access to it. They can't steal it, right? So fair enough. But then that kind of defeats the whole I'm trying to be an author thing, right? So I would say, for the most part, like I said, me and my author friends and people like that, it's just kind of like the price of doing business type of situation. I think of it kind of like owning a grocery store. If you've ever even worked in a grocery store, you probably understand how much shrinkage there is in the sense that people steal, right? And that just kind of comes with the territory of them having access to your products. There's just, it's just a thing that can happen. Now, there are some stores that are very restrictive in their shopping experience where it's like everything is, behind the counter and you cannot access any of their products unless it goes through the cashier first, basically, right? You have to say, hey, can you get me this kind of bag of chips? Or, hey, can you get me this kind of bottle of soda? And they'll bring it to you from behind the counter, but you can't just walk into the store and, pick up stuff off the shelf, right? But again, even in that case, employees steal, stuff breaks, stuff expires, stuff gets recalled. So there's still this idea that there will be losses because you have products and inventory. That's just kind of, again, the price of doing business is just the name of the game. So think about that. If you've been somebody who's like really, really stressed out and paranoid about the idea of someone stealing your work, honestly, it's kind of, like I said, part of the game. So if you just can't get past that, it's going to be really stressful for you to publish your work, because I feel like that's probably going to be something that's like constantly in the back of your mind. But if you can learn to just see it as part of the, lifestyle of being a published author, then maybe that'll help a little bit, I hope. But that's just kind of how I look at it, is just, hey, there's, a whole lot of variables that are outside of my control. And this in particular is something that I personally don't want to spend a lot of time on. I want to spend more time writing books, right? So I'm not going to put a whole lot of energy into trying to chase down pirates and find my book on this and that website, because even if I found it, honestly, I'm not even gonna lie to you, I'm probably not gonna spend the time to try to take it down. It's just like, oh, that's interesting. I'm just gonna move on. So there's my perspective on that. And then the third question was, can I publish for free? Now, this is hilarious because I periodically will put up a post, and it's hilarious, about the fact that you can publish for free. And the way people come out of the woodwork and just get to frothing at the mouth, and it's the gnashing of teeth and the tearing of clothes. And it's just like, it's not like I said anything inaccurate. You can publish for free. I know many people who literally just publish their first draft. They are the only ones who have seen it before it hits the market and people start paying for it. And honestly, there are some of these folks who are making a living. Like, they do not work a W-2 job because that's what they do. They consistently publish their first drafts. Now, that is just the answer to the question. Like, can you publish for free? The answer is yes. And keep in mind, 98% of the time that somebody asks any question that starts with can I, the answer is yes, right? Because you're an adult. You can do whatever you want to do, really, right? Can you rob a bank? Sure. Can you give up your dog for adoption? Absolutely, right? Can you punch your boss in the face? Absolutely. Like, hey, go for it. That's all you. But recognize that there are consequences to the things that you choose to do. Just because you can do something does not necessarily mean that it is what's most beneficial for you to do, right? So can you publish and not spend a dime on design, editing, not spend any time on revisions or, cover design or anything like that? Yes, like I said, people do that. But stop and think about, how that is going to help you reach your goals as an author. Because literally, if you're just publishing your first draft, you are producing the absolute worst version possible of your book. So is that what you want to try to sell to people, right? And again, for most people I know, the answer is no. So consider why you're trying to do it for free, and consider alternatives to doing absolutely no kind of like grooming of the manuscript. So I personally have run into many people who just literally don't have it, right? I'm a, I don't know, single mother of four, going back to get a GED and working 1.5 jobs to make ends meet. I don't have the money to hire an editor. I don't have the money to hire a book designer. I don't have the money to hire a cover designer. I don't have the money for proofreading. I don't have any money for any of this, right? So if I'm talking to somebody like this, is just me as a professional. If I'm talking to somebody like that, then I'm saying, all right, money is an issue. Fair enough. And again, in our current state of affairs in the world, I get it, right? So then the conversation for me turns to, okay, how can we get this done without having you spend any cash? Is there a way to do just the best we can possibly do without you spending any money? Even in the circumstance where I'm trying to help you get these services done to the piece for free, I'm not saying, just publish your first draft and call it a day. I think you can do a little bit better than that, starting with self revisions. I've had many people come to me, and it's obvious that they have not looked at their own work. Just ideas and sentences and paragraphs are just all over the place. Nothing seems to make sense. It's almost like, I've had people send me manuscripts where it's almost like they're writing 4 different novels, because it's just like, there's like mystery stuff over here and romance stuff over here, and there's like some historical fiction stuff going on, you know what I mean? And you're just like, oh my God, I'm so confused, right? So, but again, they're usually things where it's like, if they had just read over it themselves, they could have gotten things in a little bit more order than how they handed it to me, right? So keep that in mind. Doing self revisions alone, I've seen make a manuscript just exponentially better than it was, when I first saw it. And it can be a really helpful thing, because I get, why people may think, oh, I don't need to, look at it. And part of that is they think that because they aren't a professional editor, that they can't bring anything to the table. But it's like, well, you're the creator, right? You're the one that has a vision for the project. So you're going to know what fits and what doesn't, at least to some extent, right? And if you read it through, you can often find the places where you've kind of hit a weird spot, where you went off on a tangent, when you're repeating yourself, so on and so forth. You can kind of see that. And so you can work on those pieces, right? But if you just kind of, like kind of vomit it out and then just send it off, first of all, if you're going to send it off to a professional, keep in mind that it makes our job harder, and it takes longer. And that means that it's going to cost you more money. Okay. And I've told this story before about, well, it's multiple at this point, but a client, I'll say, that sent me a piece that they had not looked at. And they said, okay, I just want you to, go ahead and do developmental editing. And I'm like, yeah, okay. But this is really long. Are you sure you don't want to trim it down? And they were like, no, that's what I wanted. I just, want you to do your developmental editing thing. And so I found out that during the conversation, that the book was about a really simple and straightforward, it's like sociological concept, I guess is the way to say it. And so it was like, okay, so when he's talking to me about the concept, I'm like, well, this does not, because the manuscript was over 600 pages. And I'm like, this is not 600 pages worth of content. So I'm really adamant. I'm like, I really think you ought to just look at this, because if your concept is that simple, but the manuscript is that long, that 99% chance that means that you've repeated yourself and or gone off on tangents throughout this manuscript. And there's probably going to be a lot of cutting that can be done. And so I'm saying you can save a lot of money if you go do the cutting and then hand me the trimmed down version, because that's less that I am going to need to do and be compensated for, right? Less time I'm going to have to spend. So instead of you paying, his bill was a little over, it was almost $7,000. Instead of you paying that, honestly, you could probably trim this down enough to get down into the triple digits at least. Like instead of, I'm saying, four figures paying me. I mean, I'll take the check, but it's just, if I don't, I'm saying, if you can trim it down yourself, I think you should go ahead and do that. But, just wouldn't do it. Wanted to pay the money. I said, okay. So I went in, I looked through all 600 plus of those pages, and sure enough, just exactly what I suspected, a bunch of verbatim repetition, almost like they copied and pasted, a bunch of tangential stuff that just didn't really have anything to do with the core concept. And so when I was done making my recommendations for what to cut, it would have been somewhere around 50 or so pages of content, not 600. And so it's like, okay, do you see how you would have saved thousands of dollars if you had just cut out the repetition? Because I'm not even really talking about, cutting stuff like maybe a sentence was kind of long or something. Not like that. I'm talking about, you said the sky is blue here on page 57. You said it again on page 60. You said it twice on page 83. You know what I mean? So I'm literally just saying, let's rip out all that stuff where it's just verbatim repetition that we don't need. And then we get down to, like I said, 50 pages or so. And so this is what I'm saying, where I'm saying there's a lot of power in just going over the manuscript on your own. You can just do so much for yourself, right? Especially if you look at it with a critical eye, if you look at it like a reader would, and try to figure out, okay, what's working, what's not working, what needs to be cut, what needs to be added, all that sort of stuff. And then the other parts of the process, you can substitute out professionals that you're paying for volunteers that you're not paying. Now, again, there's going to be a pretty noticeable difference in quality, of course, if you do that. But I mean, it's, you're doing the best you can do. I still think doing that with volunteers is way better than not letting anybody else see the piece and help you groom it before it goes out on the market. And there are more authors who do this that I see. There's, like I said, there is a bunch of little bundle of authors that I see who regularly just publish their first draft, but there are even more who are publishing for free, but it's because they're tapping into their writing community and saying, hey, can I get, some people to read this whole thing and give me some feedback? And then they go in and they do self-revisions. They come back up for air, and then they do it again with another group of volunteers. And so they'll go through that process over and over and over again until they feel like they have a solid piece. But again, they're not paying a dime. They haven't paid anybody anything, right? So they're doing it all for free, but it is hitting like a certain level of rigor, right? I don't know, like I said, that it would necessarily be at the level of hiring a professional, but it's, again, a heck of a lot better than just publishing your first draft. So can you publish for free? Yes. Does that mean you just publish your first draft? It can, but I don't recommend it. But if you're in a financial situation where you really do not have it, then that would be my recommendation, is at least go through the steps of, alpha reading, outlining, writing it, self-revisions, alpha reading, you know what I'm saying, developmental editing, go through all of that with volunteers, and just be willing to, because you're working with volunteers, a lot of times your things are going to take longer. Like that is one reason. I've written about that before. Like, okay, well, if I can get people to do X, Y, and Z for free on my piece, why wouldn't I just do that versus hiring an editor? Well, it's like, well, because of the fact that you don't have really any strong accountability when it comes to working with volunteers. Every time I've worked with volunteers, I don't know that I've ever gotten 100% of the people that volunteered to read the piece to actually, come back and send me their feedback. So, but again, they're volunteers, right? They may be in their heart, they really wanted to help you, but they were just too busy, right? And you're of course on a timeline, and you're trying to publish by a certain time and all of that. So you got to kind of keep things going. And so if they don't meet the deadline, then it's just like, all right, well, I just don't get that feedback to take into this next round of revisions. Whereas when you're hiring a professional, you have paid them to do something, and this is what they do on a daily basis. So they understand how to manage their time and complete tasks in a way that is going to just not the case when it comes to volunteers. Either they do it or they don't. I guess you could threaten them or whatever, but that's probably not going to go over very well. So you don't have to do all that when you hire a professional because, again, you're paying them to do this. This is their job. They're going to get it done. Again, any catastrophe could take place, but generally speaking, when you pay a professional, you can pretty much guarantee that you're going to get that particular service completed. And so that's kind of the difference. This is what I'm saying as far as like the quality level when you're working with volunteers versus people that you've actually hired to do something. So those are my answers to those 3 questions. Did anyone, I'm going to check and see if anybody left a comment, or if you want to do so now to ask a question, then feel free. I'm looking at TikTok here. I don't think, or hold on. Nope. All right. I don't think I see anything. I see all these other little alerts. Jesus, I wish they just had like a comment part. Unless I'm missing something. No, host, guest. Pause. No. Okay. Good deal. All right. I see a couple of people still popping on. So again, I'm going to log off if none of y'all have questions. I'm going to give you a couple of seconds to ask if you have something to ask. But if you don't, that's fine. That's often the case. People are just popping in to listen. Okay, just making sure. Okay. All right. Well, if nobody has any questions, that's totally fine. I will see y'all in a couple of weeks then. So yeah, in 2 weeks on Thursday, 6 o'clock. And I'll have 3 more questions that I'm going to answer. And I'm going to actually switch to a new streaming app. So hopefully I will be able to stream to more places at the same time. That's the goal. But okay, so just like I said, if you think of something after I log off, just reach out. No big deal. I will try to answer any questions as best I can. But thank y'all for listening. I'll see you in a couple weeks.